Let me begin with an odd little story. I first learned about this conference from an email that I received as I was walking across campus from class to my car. Immediately intrigued, I was also hesitant since, as a scholar of Indian religions, of Buddhism and of Sanskrit, I don't have expertise in the field of climate science. Of course, if biodiversity loss and the collapse of ecosystems were not vital worries, I would not have given the call for papers a second thought. But having such existential concerns, I told myself, still walking to the car, is a very different thing from having a professional command of the data. Likewise, the inner critic continued, the conference organizers will probably foreground the digital humanities, while I'm one of those dinosaurs for whom the phrase digital humanities still rings as an oxymoron. Indeed, I had all but convinced myself not to submit an abstract to this conference when, driving away, I was sideswiped by a Ford Bronco. The Bronco missed me, but it did get my attention, not least because its door was painted with the words UCSD Environmental Studies. At that moment, I knew the earth was speaking to me. The choice was not fully mine to make. An odd little story, yes, but a true one. I'm sure another scholar would have just ignored the coincidence, or another, curious, would have calculated the statistical odds of being sideswiped by an environmental studies van at UCSD, and yet another, schooled in social psychology, might have used this incident as an opportunity to investigate his own tendencies towards confirmation bias. And for another, this whole roundabout set of imaginings could be a self-taught lesson in the power of cognitive dissonance. There are so many odd little stories we tell to steady ourselves. For me, it was precisely the absurdity, a near collision with an SUV convincing me to participate in an academic conference, that reminded me of what I might actually contribute to a scholarly conversation about climate change. No, not what I might contribute, but what I must contribute, what the earth wanted me to contribute. After all, why would she speak to me in her language unless she wanted me to speak for her in mine? Who am I to shut my ears to Mother Earth, or shutter my intelligence within the stone wall of academic literalism? Let's be serious. As humanists, our authority stems from our ability to illuminate the inchoate stirrings of subjectivity. If anybody listens to us, anybody other than ourselves, that is, it is generally because we help them to know what they know or to feel what they feel, yet lack the words to say. And where do we find our words? In the consumption of our subjective selves, the perplexities of emotion, psyche, and intellect that we disgorge in our scholarship, often along with our dignity. It's a messy business and lines are crossed. But human beings are messy. For me, this messy perplexity of being human includes allowing myself to chat with spirits, to recognize their power, to respect their power. And if, like Scrooge's ghosts, the spirits I meet guide me to greater insight, kindness, compassion, love, or wisdom, well then, they're real enough for me. Insight, kindness, love. What an odd little world we live in, that these words, along with the worlds they promise, feel so misplaced here in this academia of ours. What a testament to the spiritual hegemony of data-driven scientism. No less than anybody else who excels in this institution, I too hear the voice of the technocratic monster as my inner voice. So much so that I had to be shocked by a near collision into speaking these truths with bold reverence right now on the Earth's behalf. It's as simple as this. We must listen to the Earth with all our senses. We are brains, and before that we are bodies. We are bodies, and before that we are Earth. We are Earth, and in that we are also spirit. In us, the Earth is at war with herself. In us, Earth might come to terms with Earth, might be at peace with being Earth. As a humanist, I can articulate this, and I can teach about it, even though I have no idea how to calculate whether the seas will rise 1 foot or 6 by the turn of the next century. If we human beings hope to address the deep, systemic, human causes of climate change, then we must also bring a love for ourselves as earth into our daily work and labor. And we must allow that love, compassion, kindness, insight to guide us. We must allow that love to be the beacon, the telos, the measure of progress and professional value for the work we do with our critical intelligence. Perhaps this sounds like nonsense. Yes, and that's the point. Human beings are nonsensical. Never have we been, and never will we be rational agents. Isn't this our obligation as humanists, our contribution, or at least one of our contributions, to the discourse on global climate change? To champion the mysteries of the heart? Shouldn't we fight the crabbed power of this academia's hyper-rationalism by speaking the ever-present truth? In pleasure and pain, human beings only thrive fully when perplexed in the mysteries of emotion, psyche, and spirit. This perplexity is a very different thing from being blinded by science, and it's a very different thing from bread and circuses too. Its aesthetic is not one of whiz-bang amazement or guttural amusement, but of caring engagement. We must make room in our work to care about that which is meaningfully alive, though not as data. To be engaged with a meaningfulness that extends beyond the fetishism of facts. We must cultivate a capacity for speaking nonsense wisely, which we can only do by speaking nonsense wisely. What a pleasure, especially when we stand before an audience of oh-so-serious technocrats. Or do you believe that human-caused climate change can be solved by the development of sophisticated predictive models and technologies alone? Or do you believe that the statistical risks associated with human behavior can be mastered and fully factored into a problem calculated in terms of parts per million? For me, as a humanist, the myth of the rational human agent, whether innately rational or coercively rationalized through technocratic management, the myth of the rational human agent is the most dangerous nonsense of all. Apropos, let me share another odd little story. Do you remember the summer of 2008? If you are over the age of 40, you might, because you remember the turmoil in your stomach as, day after day, your retirement savings fell by half. Stock markets falling, financial giants falling. Nor are those days so old. Now on the campaign trail, Bernie Sanders refers to them in every stump speech. But in 2008, in that urgent atmosphere, the House of Representatives subpoenaed Alan Greenspan, the head of the Federal Reserve, to explain why the Federal Reserve had not been able to anticipate and prevent the financial crisis. Sitting before Congress, Greenspan described himself as also being in a state of shocked disbelief. Why? Not by the demise of the markets or the loss of jobs. No, the banker became an unbeliever when, in his words, the whole intellectual edifice collapsed. He continued, "I found a flaw in the model that I perceived is the critical functioning structure that defines how the world works." In other words, a congressman pressed Greenspan, trying to parse his bureaucraties. You found that your view of the world, your ideology, was not right. It was not working. Mr. Greenspan answered, precisely. What is the ideology that failed Alan Greenspan? He called it, quote, the modern risk management paradigm. And in his telling, after that intellectual edifice collapsed, a blanket of uncertainty descended on the investment community. Risk, which could be calculated into the price of financial instruments, gave way to uncertainty, which could not be thus priced. This economic vocabulary, valorizing risk and deploring uncertainty, received its classic formulation decades before Greenspan's 2008 testimony in Frank Knight's 1921 book, Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit. According to Knight, the line between risk proper and true uncertainty resides in a situation's susceptibility to mathematical modeling. Both terms, risk and uncertainty, speak to the inevitability of change, and the fact that human beings are unable to perfectly control or anticipate change. But whereas Knight defined risk as measurable uncertainty, he reserved the term uncertainty itself for change that is unmeasurable. We can get a handle on risk because the study of past patterns enables us to recognize, measure, and adjust our present behaviors in the anticipation of likely future consequences. Uncertainty, by contrast, cannot be treated mathematically, given that uncertain situations are definitively unprecedented. Nearly a century ago, Frank Knight was ambivalent about the facts of life. To gain profit, one must assume risk. Yet because risks can be measured and managed through statistical modeling, Knight considered the assumption of risk to be a rational choice. By contrast, Knight described uncertainty as evil, or rather as an essential evil. Uncertainty is evil because it cannot be measured or managed through predictive models. It cannot be known or mastered. And yet it is essential because uncertainty is the transcendental condition of risk. In a world of risk, the potential for true uncertainty is always already present. Note the discourse. Alan Greenspan and Frank Knight both profess a natural theology of calculability. The apocalypse of risk management's failure was a revelation that shocked Greenspan into disbelief. In 2008, Alan Greenspan lost his faith in that paradigm. And what occasioned the paradigm's failure? True uncertainty, the self-same phenomenon that Knight anathematized as evil. Given Knight's theology, is it any wonder that he chose another metaphor from religious discourse, in this latter case, sacrifice, to characterize the measures needed to combat uncertainty? How else does one ever appease evil except through the word charm of sacrifice? When I listened to the Earth last February, when I allowed myself to act on the knowledge that a near accident with a UCSD environmental studies van was the Earth telling me to talk to you, in that moment, I was being neither more nor less religious than Alan Greenspan or Frank Knight, those masters of statistical risk, so profoundly faithful to their God, the invisible hand. How could Alan Greenspan and Frank Knight not be irrational fools? After all, no less than you and me, they are Earth spirits. If risk management could not fail, then it could also never succeed. And because it can fail, it will fail. In every life, attempts at risk management will fail. And when they do, it is left to musicians and poets, painters and performers, cultural critics and historians, theologians, and small p psychologists, we oh so unserious humanists, to pick up the pieces. And not only just to say, I told you so. And because in the case of global climate change, it's not just a matter of financial instruments, but of ecological complexity, biodiversity, and resilience. Because we are Earth threatening Earth, and because we cannot afford to allow those men who have no will to listen to the Earth, and no will to heed the depths of their own hearts, and no will to embody their embodied being, and whom, I sometimes imagine, wake up from their dreams wishing, if only I could be a brain in a vat. We cannot allow their love for the pitiful rewards of serving the technocracy to trump our love for the Earth. Thus, my intervention into this conversation comes in the voice of a humanist. Risk managers in all fields. Please get yourselves busy calculating the means for addressing and allaying global climate change, this most pressing of modern risks. Your calculations are crucial. This is your work. Thank you for doing it. Risk managers in all fields. Remember that before you are a professor of this or that science, you are an animal on Earth. Be a good animal and an honest animal. Embrace true uncertainty within your model. And how do you do that? Risk managers in all fields. On this matter, look to humanists for leadership. This is what we do. Just as you plot data, we fathom uncertainties that cannot be reduced to an arithmetic of numbers, even as they do belong to a calculus of meaning. We call them mysteries. And rather than deploring mysteries as unavoidable evils of the human condition, we use the term mystery in conjunction with other terms, most prominently love, to celebrate the profundities of an emotionally mature life. And thus, humanists in all fields, let us recognize that it is our responsibility to lead. Although we don't wield the institutional or financial power to regulate how science is conducted on the edge of the Anthropocene, we must consistently press administrators and colleagues about being true believers in the inhumane and irrationally maladaptive theologies of scientism and rationalism. We must insist that our academic institutions, public as well as private, give full credence to the unmeasurable phenomena of human subjectivity, emotionality, and spirituality. Let this be our mantra: emotional maturity, not dispassionate intellectualism; psychic complexity, not monological genius; spiritual integrity, not pious scientism; love of life, not love of technology. Imagine a university where this is what administrators mean when they rhapsodize about institutional excellence. Within the world of academia, only humanists have the disciplinary capacity to help students think critically about the Earth's vital mysteries, without then also needing to reduce those mysteries to data sets. In your practice as a teacher, as a scholar, and as a citizen, let yourself listen to the Earth with those ears, the ears of engaged wonder. Let yourself speak for the Earth with that voice, the self-knowing voice of an Earth spirit, in love with your home.